Hi, everyone. Air here. Today, we're going to talk about anxious attachments, what they mean in our lives, how they got started, and most importantly, how can we work on ourselves to become better every day. With me, I have registered therapist Trevor Hanson, and he's going to be able to explain all of the nitty gritty details about how we can move past this. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So go ahead. Kind of give us the lay of the land. How did you get started in your therapy practice, and what led you to learn more about anxious attachments?
Yeah. Before I became a therapist, I never even considered being a therapist for quite some time. I was in business. I worked at Tesla. I worked actually in the Tesla Gigafactory where they were building all the vehicles, and I was part of a lot of fun projects. And I managed, a region for them to do sales and delivery, and it was kind of in theory like the coolest job ever. But at the end of the day, I wasn't terribly fulfilled, which I mean, I guess I could say generally, like high level, I wasn't terribly fulfilled with the job. I feel like there maybe needs to be something else. And it just so happened that at all at once, I broke my jaw. I broke off a relationship that was, toxic and unhealthy. And it was heading towards the track of engagement and marriage. And I'm grateful that that stopped before I went there. And I also got laid off from Tesla in this big company-wide layoff where they got rid of tons and tons of different managers, and so I got the boot all at once, broke the jaw, and I broke off the relationship, and thought to myself, man, what do I do? Like this is really really hard. It's definitely probably the crux of my life, and so I went to therapy. I'd never been before, never really considered going, but I figured, this is what people do when life gets a little bit hard. So in therapy, I realized, wow, this is super cool. Like there's so much to this. I think I could do this. I think I like this. I also wound up, in that process, working on not just the hard situation that I was facing, but it helped me to unlock a greater understanding of we're speaking about attachment styles today, but my own attachment style. I definitely was on the anxious side of things. And so I had to do my own healing. And through my own healing process, through, going back to school, getting a master's degree, doing all the supervision and the extra training that's required, I kind of niched down into a focus around attachment, attachment related. There's different like models or approaches to therapy and coaching, and some of them are based on different types of principles. And most everything that I've, trained in and focused on has been based in attachment theory. And so that's kind of been a bit of my journey, being interested in the attachment theory side because it's been helpful for me. And then also seeing how exploring the attachment theory concepts really helps couples has been a tremendous piece of my work as well. So a little non-traditional. I didn't, grow up thinking I was going to be a therapist. I didn't even go through college thinking I was going to be a therapist. Um, it wasn't until, life rocked me a little bit that I realized, oh, wait, this is what I'm supposed to do.
I actually love that you shared that story because, you could wake up halfway through your life, maybe in your 40s or 50s, and be scared to make a career change. And for all of our listeners that are in that type of situation, you just kind of told them, like, yeah, go for it. So
Yeah.
I also remember the Tesla layoffs, and it wasn't me that worked for Tesla, but my former partner that also I
uh,
feel like I could relate with you because it was heading towards marriage. Everything was like
Yeah.
going in that direction, and I'm thankful that, he's a beautiful soul, but we went different ways. But seeing him go through that experience, it really shaped him as well, and he went to therapy. Without sharing his story too much and being respectful for him, I saw how much it impacted him positively. So,
Yeah.
thank you right off the bat, like, no shame in the game. If you need help, reach out to someone like
Yeah.
Trevor, reach out to someone, in your local state or territory, because there is absolutely no shame in seeking help whenever you're going through hard times.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can you if you it feels more comfortable, you can call it coaching. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's getting that help that you need and everybody who's at the top of their game has some sort of coach. Everybody. You think about every athlete, it's you scratch your head and go, Tiger Woods, the best golfer in the world. Does he have a coach? Yeah, he does. And that's part of why he's the best. Like you never outgrow coaching, you never outgrow therapy. You can always use it, and there's literally zero shame involved. If anything, it just says something about you. Is that you're the type of person who wants to take care of yourself. You're the type of person who takes being a human being seriously, or takes your relationship seriously, or takes parenting really seriously. That's what I think when I see somebody who, decides to sign up to get some help.
Mhm. I 100% agree. I would say, and this is actually relatively new news, is I would say 4 or 5 weeks single, but I find one of the most attractive things is somebody that's working on self-development, whether it's through
Well,
mentors or coaching or therapy. Probably the most attractive quality you can find in a person. So
yeah.
let's dive into a little bit of attachments. I actually had a wonderful guest a few weeks ago, Dr. Morgan Anderson, go through the different attachments with us. But when I
Okay.
found you, I knew for a fact of like anxious attachment, this guy has it figured out. He's going to be able to speak directly to the hearts and the souls of the audience. And
Mm,
you also have a little one right now.
I do.
And I know that you're trying to install a lot of good parenting techniques to be able to ensure that this beautiful baby grows up in a very secure attachment. So,
Yeah.
will you take a moment and kind of break down what an anxious attachment style looks like?
Yeah, yeah. So at the end of the day, the attachment style, and I guess one kind of note here that I feel y- I feel like most people in my field would agree, but I tend to speak about this a little bit differently because I see attachment styles as a concept around trauma. We usually don't talk about trauma and attachment as kind of being really in the same bucket, but they truly are. Essentially, as we understand from trauma, you have events that essentially write a program for you in your mind. It writes rules. If I have a mother who's not very emotionally accessible, maybe she's great. Maybe she's just really, really anxious all the time herself or depressed. And so you learn that you need to, like, perform, kind of make mom happy in order for her to be emotionally accessible. Or maybe dad is really busy and distant, and the same kind of rules apply. Or maybe it starts to trend towards something, more detrimental, such as abuse, such as neglect. Like there's a big spectrum of events from, what we consider maybe not as severe to very severe, abuse being on the far end. Um, these events, when we experience them, what we do is we naturally adapt. And sometimes we adapt in ways that aren't helpful. We write rules for ourselves. Unwritten rules, maybe from that experience, sound like, in order to be loved, I have to earn it. Or love is inconsistent. It's not going to be there when I need it. Or, I'm not lovable. Like I just don't get love or something like, I need to be valuable because I really don't quite believe that I'm lovable or worthy. Like I got to provide, provide something in a relationship, and that's why they're there for me, not because they like me or they're interested in me or they love me, but it's because they provide something. So the anxious attachment has a lot of these unwritten rules. Usually, at the base of all the rules is some sort of fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of and belief that you are not good enough, not quite worthy. And so the way you start to cope with that, well, those fears create meanings, right? You start to interpret situations through a anxious lens. You don't get that text back. Your partner's a little bit off. They're a little bit grumpy. Maybe you don't have as consistent and frequent communication in the early stages of dating as you would like, or you perceive your partner's behavior as a threat. All of those examples can spark this fear that's based in abandonment, based in being not good enough, that says, oh my gosh, they don't love me. Oh my gosh, this is the end. Oh my goodness, I'm going to be alone forever. Oh my goodness, like it just feels like anything can reinforce it. So you have a heightened sensitivity and you interpret the world through a lens that says, I'm not good enough. People are going to leave me and love is scarce. And that's a big spectrum. Like some are on the end where almost everything seems to be a testament that I'm not good enough and I'm going to be left. And then for others, it's like, it happens every once in a while. It's not too bad, but it happens and I notice it. I'm aware of it. And some people aren't aware of it. So the spectrum is really big. There's no black and white between secure and anxious. But the anxious generally is just really fearful that they're not going to be quiet enough and that they're going to be left and their behavior starts to follow. When you're always anxious and you see the world that way, you'll try to cope and you try to protect yourself. This might look like, picking partners that aren't doing so well themselves because maybe you can help them and therefore you'll be valuable and they'll keep you around because you're helping them. Picking people who aren't quite in a good spot to be in a relationship. Maybe they're not healthy, or maybe you're just ignoring red flags because you're so desperate to be connected with somebody, not really believing that maybe you're worthy of what you really want, which are healthy behaviors and healthy mindsets. You go and you settle for the red flag, or maybe you stay in a relationship longer than you ought to. Riding a bucking bronco and pretending that it's this like beautiful, well-tamed pony. You're tricking yourself. And that's what I did for a time in relationships. I rode a rodeo of challenges through a relationship, but that desperation to be loved keeps you there. Or maybe you become overly kind of attached and a bit clingy, sending a lot of those text messages. You send three, four, five blue messages before you get the gray one back. That's for my iPhone users out there. And you have those anxious types of behaviors. It all manifests in different kinds of ways. And I know this is a long answer, but I'm going to kind of close the loop here. The the real sinister part of everything that I'm describing is that at the end of the day, there becomes a cycle. You have a trigger, and that trigger, you make meaning out of it. Oh, I didn't get the text, so therefore I'm not good enough, and they're not going to be there for me. And from that meaning, you have an emotion. Usually it's fear, usually it's anxiety. And from that emotion, you have a protection. You start to protect yourself by maybe over texting them, or you start to do whatever it is in the line of protection, or all those things that I mentioned, settling for partners that aren't quite right for you. And usually that protection leads to outcome, and some sort of negative outcome that creates more of the very thing that triggers you. The more you text them, the more they pull back, and then pulling back becomes a new trigger, and bam, you're right back in the cycle from the top. And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. Or, oh, I pick a partner that's not very healthy. The relationship collapses because usually it does. We can only take so much. And when it collapses, it reinforces the concept for you that says, I'm not good enough. People are going to leave me. Love is not to be trusted. And again, you're right back at the beginning of the cycle, the trigger. So really, the outcomes that you create in your life become your triggers in the anxious attachment cycle. So that's this kind of high level understanding of the experience of the anxiously attached person.
I love that you shared all of that because high level is a great place to start. And there was three different concepts that you brought up that I know personally have been part of my life and part of my journey and commonly found. But the first thing you mentioned that I really want to touch base on is the fact that trauma can definitely influence your attachment style. And trauma, a lot of people do think that something really negative had to happen in a single moment for you to be
Yeah.
traumatized.
Right.
But speaking from personal experience, before I kind of overcame this anxious attachment style, I used to think of myself as the doll on the shelf. And it came through kind of my childhood. I grew up in the modeling industry, in the beauty industry, and in the pageant industry, like a triple whammy.
Mm.
And so constantly I was being dressed up in different ways that weren't my natural self, being told to go and perform. And if I didn't do a good job, I would get criticized or I'd be corrected or I'd be told, do better. And because of that, I did gain this insight as okay, unless I'm dressed like a Barbie doll or unless I hit every single note in the song perfectly or,
Mm.
the performance is just fantastic, I'm not enough. And
Mm.
that to a lot of people wouldn't seem like traditional trauma, right? They
Yeah.
would be like,
Yeah.
look at you, look how beautiful, or X, Y, and Z about it.
Yeah.
That comes very individualized.
Yeah.
Can you come up with any other types of traumas, maybe through your own experiences or, through anything that you've been able to learn that you're like, this may not seem like trauma, but it's actually quite common?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, as couple of examples, even from the that I mentioned earlier, is just having a parent who suffers with some sort of mental health challenge can be, and sometimes we refer to these as big T traumas or little T traumas. The little T's are usually over time, repetitive. They're not big one single event. Like, oh man, I got, beat up by my dad or whatever in that one moment. Like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the things that are a bit more common. And I guess I'll pause here and say, like, my heart definitely breaks for those who do have those big T traumas and do have those moments. But a lot of us, and I'm sure that if you had those moments, you also have a lot of little T traumas kind of stacked up there. And it's not to say, oh my gosh, like I got this huge pile of traumas, little T's and big T's, and they're all just on top of me and I can never get out of it. Like that's definitely not the case. You can definitely heal from trauma. That's the greatest part of this whole thing is that we're talking about neuroscience, and your brain is plastic and it can change. It has plasticity, and you can actually heal these things. I guess first of all, so on a hopeful note, before we get into some more examples, but I think another example, as you said that, was, even just growing up and maybe being a little bit different. Like I was quite a bit smaller than a lot of my peers for quite some time. I caught up eventually, but I was a lot smaller. And, some of those experiences about being small as a boy growing up can be, a series of little T traumas, kind of feeling like, oh, I'm not quite enough. I can't quite participate, especially in a world of, competitive sports. That's a big part of, a young man's culture growing up. That can be kind of a small T trauma or an impact. It's really we're just when we speak about the word trauma, we're just really talking about some sort of uh, you know neurological impact on the system that creates an unwritten rule that's really just written on the nervous system. Another could be um, maybe, for example, participating or having a sibling who has a disability. Everybody's focused on them, and your needs are not as important as their needs, which, in a lot of cases, that's kind of in a way has to be true. Like in order for the family to survive sometimes, in order for things to be okay, like if that child is severely disabled, like the other children's needs are going to start to be unmet in certain ways because they just demand so much more bandwidth and tension. And they'll even require, the attention of the siblings to show up and fill in the gaps that mom and dad just can't handle. Right. And so I think when we think about trauma, we always tend to think about like there's someone to blame. And in some cases, there's really no one to blame. It's just kind of how life stacks up. And I think speaking of needs, I think we're tapping into a really important concept is that when we talk about anxious attachment, I think the name of the game is an unmet emotional need. There is an emotional need that went unmet, and that can be a byproduct of a physical need not being met or a spiritual need not being met or whatever. But it's usually at the heart of it is that you had an emotional experience around not having a particular need met. And then that translated into, I don't deserve to have my needs met. I won't get my needs met. Having my needs met is very uncommon, it's scarce. And having your needs met is also very synonymous with just being loved. And so it kind of starts to get foggy in our minds. There's no like hard line between, oh, having my needs met and being loved are two different things. Like, oftentimes they're kind of the same. And, my worth and having my needs met are two different things. Or my worth and being loved are two, and they all start to blend together. And that's kind of where a lot of this can stem.
It's very interesting to me how you brought neuroscience into this and the blending of families. As you know, there's also mirror neurons, and
Yeah.
some of these emotions that we're experiencing may not actually be coming from oneself, but through the family units. Can you
Yeah.
explain a little bit how the transgenerational, I don't want to call it transgenerational trauma, but for lack of better
Yeah.
terminology, how
Yeah.
did that happen whenever you have perhaps one of your parents as an anxious attachment or as an avoidant attachment or even
Yeah.
disorganized? How does that
Yeah.
translate genetically as well as socially to the child?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's I'm not well versed enough in the research to tell you exactly how much of your anxious attachment is going to come from a genetic predisposition or from social interaction, nurture versus nature, almost, or, nurture versus biology and genetics. And I kind of doubt that we have research that says, hey, we can actually measure like this is how much came from this, and it's gonna be impacted on both sides. I think there needs to be an awareness of, yeah, if there's a long history of trauma in your family, that behavior and the outcomes that it creates, the fear, the anxious attachment, that person's behavior, your mom and dad's behavior, are going to probably create more scenarios in which children will grow up with similar attachments. Trauma kind of begets trauma often. But there also is this biological and, genetic factor where um, people can actually inherit certain things. If, let's say, you're raised on the other side of the world by a different type of family, from birth, you can still inherit certain predispositions based on, and it's kind of, there's more research being done here. It's pretty new in the field, quite frankly, that traumatic experiences can actually impact genetics moving forward, which is a wild thing. That's a pretty insane discovery to think, something that, grandma experienced could be passing down through, really that experience alters the genetics in certain ways. But I guess before I get too deep in it, I will say, I'm probably not the best to speak on that, because I haven't done as much research into how that works, and there's probably something new out now that I don't know. So I'm just gonna listen to this and go, well, hold on, because there's always more information coming out about that.
Definitely. And if we have any neuroscientists that are tuning in or psychological, was it psychological neuroanatomy scientists out there? There's so many different fields that
Doctor,
cover this, whether it's
yeah.
epigenetics or, genetic history in general. How about perhaps instead, what are a few phrases that you might hear from an anxious parent that would be said to a child that could influence an anxious attachment? Can we come up with any of those together?
Yeah, yeah. Phrases. I'm trying to think of phrases. It's funny. My mind goes to, you know, I guess when it, and this could create an anxious or an avoidant attachment. It kind of depends on how the child would react. But for example, if you're gonna cry, you need to go to your room. You're not allowed. It basically this kind of rule that says if you want to be part of this family, you can't have those kind of big emotions. And so the child learns to, maybe um, try to people please, mask emotions, or if a mom or dad is projecting their own insecurities onto the child, like maybe the child needs to perform well in school, and mom and dad could say something like, "Hey, you're making me look bad." Like that's another thing that could kind of instill that fear. Um, just I think it's I guess I'm having a hard time coming up with phrases and more thinking about just like general patterns of less accessible parents, hey, I don't have time right now. Or if that pattern is over and over again, because again, sometimes mom and dads are going to have moments where they really truly can't drop everything and, play with the child, eye contact, touch, all the things that breed security. But consistent patterns of some sort of rejecting phrases, I think that would be in the category as well.
I love those. I actually was going towards grades as well in my mind, but another common one I hear when I go to the supermarket is, "You didn't behave well enough this week for a toy."
Ah, yeah.
That one definitely for a child, I could see them being like, "Why am I not good enough for the toy?" And it might
Yeah.
have nothing to do with the child's behavior because children are going to behave in so many different ways. And it could do
Yeah.
with, financial insecurity in the household, but the parent can't say that to the
Yeah.
child, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
I think also labeling children with and it's so easy to do, and I have a ton of compassion for parents who do. You've been bad, or you're a bad boy, you're a bad girl right now. Um, I think that takes the concept of like all of them and labels that as bad rather than like, you know, oh man, that behavior, you can do something that's bad, that's not good, that's not effective. But you as a person, you're not just like wholly bad. You're not a bad egg. And, where we see this on the flip side, good, the good job, the good boy, good girl is when we get into play. Play therapy is really interesting concept here is that with children, play therapy, you would watch it and you'd be like, what is going on? Like, you consider this therapy? And it is. Like, it actually has a lot of good science behind it. But there's this idea that it's called kind of non-directive play. And when you play with a child, you don't direct the play. They're in charge. They're doing what they want to do, and the parent is following. They're showing the child, I'm in your world. Like, I'm just going to be part of it. What you're doing is important to me. And when the child does something, the parent isn't reinforcing immediately with praise. Oftentimes we'll say, oh, they pick up the red marker and their color. Oh, good job. Good job. Like, everything is good job. And it's funny. It's hard not to, right? Like me and my wife catch ourselves, even with like our little baby, even though he doesn't understand language really yet. We're still trying to practice these concepts of, heavy, heavy praise during play can create this anxiety that play is not just, you know, a opportunity for learning and growth and expression and relaxation and connection, but it becomes a performance. And so therefore, if mom and dad don't say good job, this child starts to feel anxiety, like, oh my gosh, like that's how I get approval from mom and dad. They didn't say good job. I drew with the red marker. Like, what's going on? And so the alternative is to just comment and observe because it shows them that you're still involved, you're still interested, but there's no aspect of judgment, either positive or negative. It's just, oh, you chose the red marker. Look at that. You're drawing, a picture of Santa. Oh, okay. You're coloring here. You just are noticing what they're doing. Oh, you chose to stack the blocks there. Hmm. Okay. And you're just noticing. Um, it's an interesting deal. And obviously, I'm not saying don't praise your children. I think praise is very important. But when we have praise heavy play, that can even create some anxiety for a child.
that was awakening for me because I can now bridge this between growing up as a child and getting into a romantic partnership as an adult, because I often think that our child dynamics really influence our adolescent relationships and our adult relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're perfect mirrors of where we're at in our healing journey and what we experienced in
Yeah.
the past. But I have some girlfriends, and I've even fallen in this kind of weird scenario before where when you say good girl or you say good boy, there's this differentiation of power at play, right? The parent is the one saying it to the child. The child,
Mm.
9 times out of 10, unless you just have a very lovely, headstrong, says what they mean type of child, isn't going to turn around and be like, Trevor, good boy. you know,
Yeah.
stack them up right? The child doesn't really do that. It's more of a
Yeah.
top down, not a down to top type of thing.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
I notice in a lot of insecure relationship dynamics, instead of this sense of equality and a partnership, the
Uh,
masculine energy or the male influence in the relationship will say good girl to
mm,
their partner. And
mm,
I hear about this a lot with like couples therapy, or I also teach with tantric couples. And I'm not sure if you're aware of tantra, but that dynamic in certain play can be great. But if you are constantly putting that power differentiation between the two in the relationship or multiple people, depending on what type of relationship you have, it
mm,
really can make an anxiety driven relationship of why are you
yeah.
doing this for one thing, like why am I not enough, like I believe I'm a woman, right? I believe I'm an adult. So
Right.
do you
Yeah.
bridge there too?
Yeah. And I think, you know, I'm in a parent-child dynamic, the power differentiation is necessary. Like it needs to be there. In a romantic relationship, if that same dynamic exists, then it does create anxiety. We're talking about structural family therapy as we kind of get into this, is that there's a structure to where everybody's supposed to be. And as children move into parental roles, this happens in divorce, where maybe children start to get a bit triangulated and, they're taking on responsibility they ought not to, or they're taking on, you know, things that mom and dad are telling them about the other person. Like they start to get pulled into the parental role, and that's really anxiety inducing for a child, and that could create some anxious attachment. In a couple's dynamic, if your example is one. Another example is if one partner, let's say there's some sort of betrayal in the relationship, but they're wanting to work on it, which I do a ton of that work with couples, where there was somebody stepped out of the relationship, and then forever thereafter, the partner who's trying to cope with the anxiety of, the betrayal, the person who was on the betrayed side of things, they may become hyper vigilant and very parental in their attempts to keep things together and keep themselves protected, right? They want to know what's on your phone. They don't want to know where you've been. They're setting all the family rules. All of a sudden they're just like leading everything. That's another example. But when we have that imbalance in the family structure, it does create a lot of stress and anxiety. Um, and some people may put themselves into that position on purpose. Like, let's say you are the child that grew up in a praise heavy home, and when that praise started to become associated with, you know, um, with lovability. Like I'm loved when I'm praised. And so therefore you get into relationships where you're going to look for somebody who's very much top down, where they're telling you, good girl, good boy all the time because you like that. That's your homeostasis. That's what you're used to. And so you put yourself in those situations. And you know, I I guess in another sense, the anxious attachment could really need a lot of validation because of that same. Let's say you get into a relationship and it's not the type of person who's going to be, patting you on the head all the time, but you want the pats on the head, and you're going to be like, hold on, like, come on, like, pat my head a bit. Like, I need some validation. I need to know that I'm good enough. I need to, I need that constant stream. And so those are a few of my thoughts on how maybe the child dynamic can transfer into the adult, and also just how important it is to have a correct structure or balance within a family system in order for it to operate smoothly.
I want to approach one more topic until we get into really how we can move past the anxious attachment, because I feel like, giving the secret sauce is probably the most important part of the entire episode. I I want to hit on this subject where it it seems to be that a lot of people that have anxious attachments find themselves in negative relationships as adults.
Uh-huh.
I am curious your thoughts about there are people out there. We diagnosably can call them narcissists, or we can call them abusers in a different type of way, physical, sexual, mentally, emotional. These type of people do target the anxious attachment style because of that need for validation.
Mm,
How can we right off the bat when we are in that talking stage, or getting to know somebody at work, or recognizing these people in our lives that truly do not have the best intentions for us but are
yeah.
representing themselves as the hero? How What can we trigger in our mind whenever our heart wants to say something different?
Yeah. Well, I think what's important is to really get clear on, well, a couple of fronts. One is, I think, doing the work to find underlying healing of the anxious attachment, which there's a ton of things that go into that. But healing the root of the anxious attachment, I think, helps you just be in a state where you just no longer put up with that stuff because you're more self-respecting in that. And because you are secure within yourself, you can recognize healthy and secure behavior because you do it and you're aware of it and you stop yourself from doing that which is not healthy and you say yes to that which is. And so therefore you kind of in a way become an expert because you do it all day yourself. And then when you see something different, it's easier to sniff out. Right? Hold on, this is not right. This feels weird. This is not okay. You can just see it faster. So that's one point. And then the other one I think is getting really clear on what what you need out of a relationship. And it doesn't mean that, you're going to write a wish list and that wish list is going to be granted. He's going to be 6'3" and this and that. Like, no, we're going to be talking about like emotional needs and remembering certain deal breakers, because what happens is a lot of those who may be more manipulative, as we're kind of talking about, or on the personality disorder spectrum, they will often wrap the, loving, connecting behavior that the anxious attachment will need. Well, let me rewind that. I'm going to say it the opposite way. They'll wrap the manipulation, lies, mistreating you, things of that nature. They'll wrap it in all of the good stuff, all of the love. Like they're pretty savvy on how to maybe communicate in a way that feels loving, that feels understanding enough to keep you kind of in it. But you have to be able to kind of get a radar on and say, hmm, I'm noticing the manipulation and, and the love bombing, or I'm noticing the kindness and I'm noticing how they don't treat me right. I'm noticing how they maybe belittle me and how they then build me up after. Like being able to just keep a radar for both. And I think people can get a little carried away with this too, where they become hyper vigilant. Well, if it had partners like this in the past, then everybody becomes a narcissist. I was like, well, hold on. Oh, man, that's probably not going to serve you either. So, doing the work to heal the underlying trauma is probably the number one thing I would say, because in those cases, distinguishing between acceptable behavior and unacceptable becomes like easy and natural. You don't have to write it out, compute it. And another small thing is just get a person in your life that has a good relationship, a person you can trust, a person who can maybe call you out a little bit, and tell them about your relationship and really tell them, be like very honest about your relationship and what's going on. And if that's a therapist or a well trained coach, that's great. You know, I think that's an investment well worth it to have somebody there with you if, let's say, you're starting to date again, or you came out of a relationship that wasn't healthy. You want to make sure you don't do that again. Having somebody to just check in with, and they can be like a little bit of a reality check, and they go, whoa, 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 that thing you just told me, that that sounds a little fishy. Can we come back to that? Can we double check this real quick so that we make sure you don't get hurt? Having somebody outside of yourself is always a great idea.
I love that. 100%. It's almost the accountability partner that you find in somebody. And another point that was so brief, but I just want to highlight it again is, yes, if you have been in an abusive relationship or a narcissistic relationship in the past, you may have this hyper vigilant type of radar because of fear.
Yeah.
And you
It,
could find somebody that's very emotionally healthy, very secure, and you can see these red flags, quote unquote, but they're not really red
yeah.
flags. They're what you want to see and projections of your past. I had a
Yeah.
relationship personally that fell into that where he and I believe it 100% based off of the experiences that he shared with me and I learned about from, his peers and family that he had gone through something very traumatic and finding somebody safe, finding someone secure that, was very stable emotionally and mentally. It was almost like they were picking because they couldn't trust it. And
Yeah.
I would invite anyone on this podcast listening to be like, yes, this happened in the past, but if you did the work, like Trevor said, and you are now in this healing stage, and you don't have to be perfectly healed to enter into a new relationship, right? It's a
Yeah.
process, but don't take from the past and project that into the future because that will only destroy your new relationship.
Yeah. I
Unfortunately.
think the thing. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. And unfortunately, that's what happened. And that's very sad. And I wouldn't want to see that happen to anyone listening to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And essentially, that's what the anxious attachment is. You're projecting some sort of past experience or past person or a parent in the past onto current situations and individuals. There's kind of the image of the inner child that was wounded that still exists within you, quite literally from a neurological standpoint. Those neurons are still wired together. And so the inner child does exist in you. And that's not just metaphorical, spiritual, and all that stuff, which it, is in a lot of ways too. But it is quite literally there. And then that inner child will project the concept of maybe, let's say, mom who is highly critical onto the partner that you find. And so anytime your partner has, maybe they tease you or maybe they joke with you and you're incredibly hurt, incredibly offended, or, the distant father. And so all of a sudden, like whenever, they don't text you back, it's like your world is collapsing. It's like they become your mother, they become your father, they become that person that didn't fill those emotional needs or those people, because it could be many. Um, and so essentially that's what the anxious attachment is. We're projecting some sort of version of a person from our past onto the people and the situations in which we find ourselves in the present.
Definitely. And I would say if you are dating somebody that you can recognize their anxious attachment, which doesn't mean that they're completely undateable. I don't want to say that.
No.
But I want to say if you can register that they are anxious, and I think it's a percentage. I don't think it's just you are or you aren't. But
Yeah.
if they are connecting you, for instance, in a previous relationship, I would always be told, "You're so much like my mom." But I learned a lot about his mother and their dynamic, and I recognized some of that anxiety coming from that. And
Hmm.
as a partner, you should be able to have real conversations with whoever you're dating, whether you're an adolescent,
Yeah.
adult, or even a senior, and be like, "Hey, I want you to look into this a little bit further because it does influence our relationship." And quite frankly, it makes me a little uncomfortable, right? So,
Yeah.
my last question, and this kind of leads into how do we start healing this anxious attachment style, is if you are on the other side, whether you are also an anxious person or a secure attachment or even an avoidant or fearful avoidant, how would you best suggest to approach an anxious attachment style from somebody, even if they only have like 20% anxious?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it depends on how committed the relationship is. In early stages versus, really fully committed relationships, this is going to look quite different. And if in a fully committed relationship, um, I guess it's going to change also depending on how much that person is conscious of the anxious attachment and how much work they want to do. But let's say they're a person who knows and they want to work on it. Being being able to notice moments when the anxious attachment is happening and realizing that you can be a safe landing zone for them, um, without also getting in the trap of letting the inner child dictate the outcomes and the behavior of the relationship. Like you, two people, one being anxiously attached, maybe the other one not, that they could get in this trap of trying to cater to the inner child at all costs, right? Over validating. No, you're good. You're good. I love you. I love you. I love you. Like, that's not very sustainable. Or avoiding situations that are going to trigger the anxious attachment, or just playing a big game of avoidance. That's not going to work. There's a difference between avoidance and gentle, um, gentle partnering. I guess I'm coining a new phrase right now. You know, yeah, and in a way, we get to show up gently with them and allow the attachment style and the fears underneath to become explicit, because sometimes they're just underneath the surface. But this might look like, oh, you know what? Like, maybe you're calling it out for your partner, or they do it first, where you go, instead of just letting the fear take you on a ride, it's like, well, hold on, is that little voice inside of you right now the one that says you're not good enough? Is it around? Like, are we hearing that? And they can go, yeah, it really is. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, what's bringing that up for you? Well, I don't know. I just got done with a job interview and I'm feeling like I'm just like, it feels more than like a job interview. It feels like, I don't know, like my worth is kind of tied to this. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Can we pause here? Can we challenge that thought? Like, I get why you feel that way, but maybe we can kind of take a step back and challenge. If I don't get this job, that means that I'm unworthy, that I'm not lovable, and I'm not good enough. Hmm. Just being able to have an explicit conversation about the feelings, talking about it almost as if it's an external thing. Hey, is that the anxious attachment thing coming up right now? Yeah, it is. And it's so funny. Even I'll even have with my clients, either we externalize it as the inner child, or we'll externalize other emotions as kind of almost like characters. Like I had a young man that I worked with who we called his anxiety Bill. Like, hey, Bill's here? Yeah, Bill's here. You like doing to be work. Really? What's he saying? Well, he's telling me I'm a big fat loser. I'm like, oh man, Bill's not very cool. And we got to laugh about it. And so it just added this element of humor to something that seems so heavy. Uh, or I think externalizing it and making it explicit and being just really gentle and patient without you know, letting that inner child, that anxious attachment, Bill, whatever you want to call it, they can't drive the bus and you can't start to cut things out of your life or bend over backwards in order to cater to its desires, because that'll just ensue a lot of chaos and a lot of stress for both partners.
Definitely. I want to kind of put a bow on this, and if there's anything you want to add to it, by all means. You pointed out that the external stressor that caused the anxiety came from something else. It was external. It was a job interview that they were anxious about and they brought it home, or they brought it, to the date if they're not living together.
Yeah.
It wasn't the partner that did it. So if you're in a relationship where, maybe going back to that manipulative or narcissistic personality disorder
Yeah.
spectrum, the partner that you're with, as someone that is overcoming your anxious attachment, shouldn't
Yeah.
be purposely putting you in situations where they know you're going to be triggered. Where, let's say, and this is sometimes completely innocent because males
Right.
are genetically predisposed to look at pretty things, right? Male psyche. So, a guy checking out another girl at, a mall or something like that, or noticing beauty, or we get into like play as far as like fetish, those type of things. Those relationships, if not handled very gently, and I like your gentle partnering type of dynamic, I might coin that with you. That was beautiful.
Mm.
Like, your partner should be able to recognize and not, you know, fluster the wounds if you are trying to
Yeah.
have like a long-term relationship. And manipulation,
Yeah.
those type of things, I feel like anxious attachment gets really targeted when it comes to that. But the fact that you
Yeah.
this was an external thing that got brought into the relationship that had nothing to do between the two of them, I feel like that's
Mm.
very solid.
Yeah. And, I guess, as you say that, I also think of the flip side. The anxious attachment can turn into a lot of manipulation from the anxiously attached as well. And maybe we start looking here on like the borderline personality spectrum a little bit, where, for example, your mention of maybe a guy like, you know, seeing some other girl or like noticing something or whatever, or maybe, you know, let's play out a scenario. The anxiously attached female is walking through a mall and she's so fearful of abandonment, so fearful of not being good enough, and they know that they're about to, walk down the hall past Victoria's Secret, and she goes, put your eyes to the floor, don't look up, like can you please look down, it makes me feel safe. And it's like,
Mm.
man, you're walking around the mall looking at the floor because she's triggered because you're gonna walk past Victoria's Secret. Like that can become a manipulative situation, right? Hey, when we go to the grocery store, look down because there might be a pretty girl, or that you'll see on the tail end of betrayal often. And my heart breaks for those who've been betrayed. I'm not trying to, sit here and victim blame or whatever else, but we do look at how our efforts to protect ourselves can sometimes become manipulative for our partners. And, that situation, the partner is therefore letting the inner child drive their relationship, drive the bus. Okay, yeah, I'll always look down. Yeah, I'll stop going to the gym. Yeah, we'll just not go to the pool because there's, girls in swimsuits. Yeah, we'll cut out the beach too. Right? Whoa, man, there's a lot of potential manipulation, and allowing yourself to be manipulated by the anxious attachment. And so being cautious of that too, that it can in a way happen on the flip side. As you attempt to protect yourself, you try to control others.
I love that you brought that up because it is a spectrum, right? Like it's a partnership
Yeah.
and every relationship is very different. I feel like this is a conversation that leads into boundaries, if anything, because there's a
Yeah.
very big difference between a Victoria's Secret poster and, wanting to have playmates in a relationship. Like that's a
Mm,
huge, spectrum. And if you haven't healed this anxious attachment, it can definitely be triggered in different types of ways, but it's a balance,
mhm,
right? You got to do the work
mhm.
yourself. And even if you were secure in one relationship, another relationship could cause an anxious attachment if you're not being treated correctly, or an avoidant
Yeah.
attachment if you're not being treated correctly. So
Yeah.
that's why it's a healing journey, right? Not a destination. With
Yeah.
all of this gold that Trevor just, spun for us. There's my accent coming out. I got excited. So,
Ah,
what is
yeah.
one solid piece of advice you want to leave us with? You're trying to heal the anxious attachment. You're working with somebody, whether it's a coach or a therapist already, that you could do on your own to kind of give you this safe playground.
Mm, mm. I guess I'm gonna give an answer that's not exactly the answer to your question, because it may happen on your own, and it may need some extra help and some extra guidance, but anxious attachment, all attachment, is created through emotional experiences. You never learn it logically. Nobody reads it to you out of a book, and then all of a sudden you grow up and you're anxious or you're secure. It is never a logical experience. It is an emotionally moving experience, either positive or negative, that creates the attachment. And the reformation of an attachment is also, or the healing of an attachment style, is also found in emotional experiences. If you feel like you're going to therapy and all you do is kind of talk about realizations, like sometimes that realization can be emotionally moving enough to have a correction, an underlying neurological corrective experience. But most of the time, that's not going to quite do it. There has to be some sort of emotionally moving experience towards healing. This might look like doing some, active visualization around the inner child type work. This might look like, doing some somatic type therapy, getting your body involved. There has to be some sort of emotionally moving experience in order to really make this make this change happen. That's what I try to do with all of my clients around everything, rebuilding trust and relationships. We're not going to sit there and be like, oh, yeah, you need to stop doing this. You need to start doing that. And that's going to be better. And like, sure, there's a little bit of that. But at the end of the day, if I have a couple in my office, I want them to feel emotionally connected, you know, loving. They're having, this moment where they're like understanding the depth of their partner's pain and it's bringing something up for them. Like, we have to move emotionally in order to heal emotionally. And so that's that concept. I think if you hold on to that and seek methods of healing that you believe will create emotionally moving experiences, then you'll have much more success.
Mm. I like it. I like that you took the question and you made it your own too. So thank you for that. I am curious for everyone out here, how do we find you? What states or territories are you registered in? And
Yeah,
how, yeah, I know you work with couples, you work with attachment styles in theory.
yeah,
Who is like the best person to reach out to you right now if they are seeking help? So kind of a
yeah,
trifecta question here.
yeah. Yeah, I'll give you all of it. So the first piece, remind where you can find me. Okay, yeah. Instagram primarily. I mean, I'm on TikTok, but I feel a lot it's easier to like connect with people on Instagram. So The Art of Healing by Trevor on Instagram, or you can just go to thearthealingbytrevor.com. Either one will work fine. Um and I always tell people, feel free to send me a DM. I don't give advice over DMs, but I can point you towards the right resources or help you get, an appointment set up with like myself or a member of my team or, one of my programs or anything else. There's so many different things that I can point you towards. And I manage that. Like I respond to pretty much everybody. So that's one. And then where I can help you, I am licensed specifically in Utah right now. I am getting licensed also in the state of Hawaii. However, we do also provide coaching. And our coaching is really unique because it's kind of like the intersection of therapy and coaching in a way where oftentimes, coaching lacks the depth that is needed in order to create real sustainable change. And then therapy oftentimes lacks the real actionable directives for moving forward, making certain changes within your life. And so we try to kind of combine those two concepts in a way and wherever you are, we can help you with that coaching element, whether it's me or a member of my team. We can help you there. And then the the other piece is the Anxious Lovers Club. If we're talking about anxious attachment, I have to mention this. There's a program that I run. It's a live program. It only happens. Recently, it's been about once a quarter, but it may not happen that frequently in this next year. But about once a quarter, I run a live program. It's 5 weeks, 5 live calls. All the calls are recorded, and it's specifically designed to create emotionally moving experiences to help you overcome anxious attachment. There's that. And ideal person to call me or reach out is I work a lot with couples who are, in distress, looking to heal, or just looking to kind of go to the next level. I work a lot with individuals who are wanting to show up better in their relationships in general, whether it's I have an anxious attachment, I have a avoidant attachment, I just want to be a better leader, in my home and for my family. And then I also work quite a bit with business owners, entrepreneurs, and other coaches who are really looking to develop themselves emotionally and uh, financially from a business standpoint, because I bring a lot of my business background into those types of conversations for those who want to do that work.
That was a beautiful wraparound from business where we started with Tesla to registered
Yeah.
therapist. That was great.
Yeah.
Full circle moment. But thank you so much, Trevor, for joining me. This was so informative. I feel like it was even very healing in different ways to explore different topics within the anxious attachment. So,
Yeah.
with everyone else out there, as always, thank you for growing and healing with me today.